All right. Thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. Today with me is County Attorney Josh Rackey, and we are going to give a release regarding yesterday's officer-involved shooting involving a Cascade County Sheriff's deputy. First of all, thank you to everyone in here. Everyone was super, super patient with me. Thank you. I ended up actually being on scene rather quick in this event, so I was juggling a million different things. So I really appreciated that. Thank you so much. You guys do a great job, and I really appreciate that. And thank you huge to our community. The outpouring of support, it's just been overwhelming. This community really, really takes care of our people. But I believe that's because our deputies do an amazing, amazing job, and they take care of them. So we have that good relationship in our community, and I really appreciate that at a time like this. So thank you all so much.
I've got some secrets that I gotta keep. Yeah, there's emotions falling underneath. It doesn't seem daylight. We feel the same. I've got a question burning through my mind. The only one that leaves me terrified. I've asked myself about a million times, but I'll never
The shooting on February 23, 2024, triggered a procedure called the coroner's inquest. According to the Montana Code 46-4-201, an inquest is a formal inquiry into the causes of and circumstances surrounding the death of a person and is conducted by the coroner before a coroner's jury, and later in 46-4-205. After viewing the body and the death scene and hearing the testimony, the jury shall render its verdict, which must be by majority vote, and certify the verdict in writing, signed by each juror. This episode will be solely devoted to examining the documents and audio recordings of the coroner's inquest. There were no video recordings or pictures allowed during the inquest, which means that we are severely limited in what we can present to you visually. This show does not have the budget for animation, so instead, 4 of us gathered to review the inquest in a much more standard podcast format. What we will point out are dozens of inconsistencies, lies, and misrepresentations made by every government official involved in the inquest. Many of these government officials were elected by and are supposed to be serving you. Let's focus on the actual transcript for a bit, and we can go on tangents. I have no problem with tangents, but let's start from the top of the transcript and work our way down, and then we can jump to different places that we need to. And I have Kevin's thing pulled up and the transcript pulled up.
I think one thing just for us to start off is what's the point of these inquests, and these are also based off of Montana law. But ultimately, based off of 46-4-205, the verdict of an inquest must set forth who the deceased person is, when and where the deceased died, if the deceased died by criminal means, and if the deceased was killed or deceased death was occasioned by the act of another by criminal means, who committed the act if known. And so there's a good deal of just trying to lay the groundwork of who actually died and how did they die as part of the verdict. But then there's these other elements which we're more focused on was it done by criminal means, and who actually committed those acts in the first place.
Let's first establish who was part of the coroner's inquest. The proceedings were held before Patrick McDuffie, the coroner out of Lewis and Clark County. Joshua Racky was the Cascade County attorney, along with the assistant attorney, Corey Larson. The order of witnesses went as follows: Jacob Try, deputy sheriff; Aldo Fusaro, medical doctor at the crime lab in Missoula; Jesse Slaughter, Cascade County sheriff; Bruce McDermott with the Division of Criminal Investigation in the DOJ for the state of Montana; and finally, Jonathan Cadner, Lieutenant of Special Services for the Cascade County Sheriff's Office. The jurors' names are also listed on this document. However, we will not be identifying them on this podcast since we are not investigating them at this moment. By the way, anybody who's out there, this transcript is 141 pages long. Our conversation about this will be drastically shortened. This episode will probably be about 45 minutes, I'm guessing. So it's there's a lot to go over, and there's a lot of things in here that you need to pay attention to, because things that Bart has already mentioned, I missed, I didn't think about. We're dividing this analysis up into chapters based on the witnesses. The first up is Jacob Try. You can follow along by downloading both of these files from our investigatory website, https://thecascadeeffect.net, if you so choose. When possible, we will be playing the actual audio from the inquest after we cite a problem.
Okay, thanks for coming back today. This will be the only one we're doing today. It will take a little longer, but I'm hoping to have this done by lunch.
I'm hoping to have this done by lunch.
Yeah.
So to me, that's pretty unprofessional. That's just my knee-jerk reaction to the whole thing. You know,
Yeah.
hey guys, let's just get through this thing real quick. It's just a formality. Nothing to see here. Let's move on.
Yeah.
You know,
Right.
instead of taking the thing seriously.
I'm going to give you a brief rundown of the facts and then give you an outline of what we're going to go through with witness testimony today. So on the late afternoon of February 23rd, 2024, Detective Sergeant Jake Try was serving a search warrant on the house or on the property located at 77 Wexford Lane.
We can debunk the inquest right away when he reads that Detective Try was out there serving a search warrant. So he's already misled the jury and opened up, because if we look on page, and you guys can all go to and I'm talking to the audience, page 22. He says, my initial intent, this is Try speaking, Detective Try admits, after I put on my vest and I continue driving down Wexford Lane, my initial intent was just to run surveillance. And then he does it again on page 28. I was supposed to be only running surveillance at that time, but the interaction with Mike made this contact happen sooner than it was supposed to. Page 28. Racky sets this up to be a complete lie. He's not out there to serve a search warrant. He admits it here on page 22 and on page 28 and Try's own testimony. He's only out there to go and do surveillance.
Detective Try had asked him to get off the property. Well, the search warrant was served.
Racky is telling the jury, misleading them again. Detective Try had asked him to get off the property while the search warrant was served.
Yeah, that's not true.
You'll next hear from Sheriff Slaughter. He was the second officer, or second deputy, or I guess he's not a deputy, he's the sheriff, but the second person on the scene following the shooting. He'll tell you what he did and how that went with Mr. Hanson.
Incorrect. Here is Jesse Slaughter's testimony on when he arrived on scene.
As I pulled up on scene, I could see, I didn't know who they were at the time because I kind of had tunnel vision focused on what was going on, but I could see my uniformed deputies and some of my detectives dealing with the suspect, and I kind of knew the general area he was in. And then Detective Try was behind his Chevy Equinox there.
Without further ado, I'll call Detective Try.
First of Jacob, last of Try, T-R-I.
And Sergeant, where are you employed?
I'm employed at the Cascade County Sheriff's Office.
And what training have you received to become a sheriff here at Cascade County?
I initially attended the Montana Basic Law Enforcement Academy in June of 2014. Since then, I've attended in excess of 820 hours of post-accredited training, which is the Montana standard for peace officers. I also have hundreds of hours of out-of-state training as well as inter-office training.
All of that training
Yeah.
seems like it was disregarded entirely on this day.
Well, yeah, everything was thrown out the window on this day. I mean, he didn't follow a damn thing that he learned in there.
I'd like to take you back to February 23rd. Was there anything unusual about that day?
I was at my residence at lunch when Sergeant Harris, a patrol sergeant, was off duty. And he contacted me. He was a former detective that I worked with, and he contacted me and informed me that Pam Polajewski was at Walmart on 10th Avenue South, and he observed her purchase some animal food. And he was aware that she was not supposed to be in possession of animals.
Detective Try testifies that that he had Mr. Hanson, and he says she's not supposed to possess or be in possession of animals. That was Try's testimony. In the audio at 47 seconds through 53 seconds, he turns on his head, and it actually says what he said to him is she's not supposed to be around animals or possess any. Yeah. So he not only did he lie to Mr. Hanson before jumping the fence and getting him all worked up, but he also lied during his testimony that he did what he transferred over to Mr. Hanson.
And you just mentioned she wasn't supposed to have animal food. Do you know why?
In 2020, May specifically, the Cascade County Sheriff's Office, including myself, were investigating Pam Polajewski for animal cruelty.
Racky comes in and says, and you just mentioned she wasn't supposed to have animal food. Do you know why? And then rather than correcting that, because that is incorrect, Try just answers the question as if it was true, then ends it with she was not allowed to possess animals based on her while on bond.
Right.
Right.
So that's completely false. Again.
And this is going to be a repetitive thing. So Try multiple times doesn't actually answer the question that is asked. In fact, he avoids answering the question in a couple times that we'll get to here in a little bit.
Despite, thinking he's just trying to deflect, I think there's just another element of, is he truly listening? Like, is there active listening that he is doing when in those situations? And how does that speak to those thousands of hours of training and how he interacts with the public? Is he truly listening to them when they are conversing, or is he just having his own little conversation in his head and then having that projected on the other individual and then acting based off of that?
I should back up a little bit. Before I went to Walmart, I called a guy by the name of Pat Fox, which is Pam's neighbor. And on January 31st of 2024, he called in a complaint that Pam had animals on her property.
Their neighbor out there called in a complaint that Pam had animals on her property, but they never did a thing at that point in time. And that's a big issue right there.
Like, why wasn't a search warrant signed for that to investigate?
That is a good question.
Exactly.
Right.
If there's any more reason to get a search warrant, it was that telephone call to the sheriff's office, then supposedly Pam buying some kitty litter at Walmart on the 23rd of February, a month later. But nothing had happened between January 31st and February 23rd.
And then I contacted Detective Smith, which he works for me, and I asked him to go to 77 Wexford Lane and run surveillance to see if Pam had actually went to that property following Walmart. And while I went to the county attorney's office and applied for a search warrant.
Our suspicion is that there is a huge constitutional infringement on both Pam and Mike in this instance, because ultimately any sort of surveillance in the state of Montana should require some sort of warrant, some sort of judge signature, because we are one of the few states, I think it's probably 10 or less of the states that we have, that we actually protect the right of privacy. And based off of the Montana Constitution, it reads, the right of individual privacy is essential to the well-being of a free society and shall not be infringed without the showing of a compelling state interest. And to me, I interpret a compelling state interest or showing of a compelling state interest to be a search warrant, or I guess it would just be a warrant for surveillance. I mean, we can't just use drones to surveillance people's property here in Montana. You need some sort of warrant for that. To be able to go out to their property like Smith did in the first place after the purchasing of the cat food or cat supplies, that should have required a warrant in the first place. And they used that information to actually get the warrant. That's Kevin and my interpretation. And I think that makes sense to us when it comes to our right to privacy here in Montana.
And I think we have to put this in the context too of we have to separate Pam and Mike. Mike's property and where he resides, he has full protection of the privacy of Article 2, Section 10, where he has, that is his property now. He's just renting the property. He's just out there. So when you separate that, Mike had every right to his own privacy and not being spied on. He's not even on the warrant.
And I think we have to take a look at the actual time frame, because there were two instances of surveillance. There was the one Tri was surveilling the property, but then there was the original surveillance that provided the bulk of the evidence for the initial search warrant. So in the search warrant, they used prior history of Pam, which that shouldn't really count. They used the purchasing of cat food. Okay, that's on the search warrant. But then they also used the surveillance that Detective Smith was using when he was on the property.
Right.
Or potentially right off the property, to observe Pam putting different bags in her truck. That surveillance was just directed by Jacob Tri to Detective Smith, but that wasn't backed by any sort of showing of compelling state interest. And so all of the evidence that was used, that observation used in the search warrant that they got signed by the judge, the only thing there that might be credible is the purchasing of cat food at Walmart, because they should have showed a judge or asked a judge, can we surveil this property because of what we've seen at Walmart?
At some point, did Sergeant Smith get spotted at the property?
He did, yes.
And could you tell the jury just briefly how that happened? And here's where Tri admits that surveillance is impossible, and yet he went there to do surveillance later in the day. He says Pam's property, 77 Wexford Lane, is a dead end. It's about 10 acres. It's a dead end property of Wexford Lane, and so there's no really clear path to park there. And so while she was out in the area, she had observed him. And we've shown y'all video. We've shown y'all pictures. Like, you can see there's literally no place to do surveillance from unless you're on a neighbor's property from one of their buildings with actual surveillance equipment.
Yeah. You'd have to be 200, 300 yards away with your mic, with your
minimum.
You knew all of this, but you still went 0 to 60 anyways.
Well, and like you said, he knew this area. Like in a little bit above in the transcripts, they mentioned that Tri was involved in the 2020 incident. He knew what can or cannot be done out there in terms of surveillance and how well it could actually be done.
And while we were driving, or he was running surveillance, ultimately Detective Smith informs me that Pam had identified him as law enforcement. At that point, I was like, well, surveillance doesn't work if she's identified us as law enforcement, or him as law enforcement, in an unmarked vehicle, which he confirmed his identity as a sheriff's deputy.
And at that point, I was like, well, surveillance doesn't work if she's identified us as law enforcement or him as law enforcement in any unmarked vehicle. Now we fast forward to page 22, which we are on, and this is what he says. My intentional intent was just to stop and run surveillance until Smith arrived. Wasn't the surveillance already blown?
Can you just tell the jury the general way we get search warrants and how that works?
Before COVID, we used to go take a hand copy to the district court judge and we would swear. Since COVID, we've gone to an electronic format. So there's a couple ways we can do this. We can either type a PC affidavit, which is essentially the facts of the case that we're telling the judge, or why we have facts to look for the items on that property. Or we can go to the county attorney's office and work with them to give them the facts. We review the warrant. Ultimately, they send that electronically to the judge. The judge calls us over the phone. We swear to the facts over the phone. They email that signed copy, if they grant it, of the application, as well as the search warrant to the judge or the county attorney, and then they email us a copy of that.
And was that process followed in this case?
It was.
There's nothing in Montana Code Annotated that says they can serve a search warrant without the actual warrant. And we've also been waiting for responses from both Slaughter and from Racky to anything that points differently than that. So we're very adamant that Tri had to have a copy or the original or a photocopy of that warrant before he even bothered to show up out there.
Yeah.
So it's just cut and dry. There's just no other way around it. It doesn't matter what they think or what their procedure is. Statutes always trump procedures or rules. It's that simple.
This is 227. Montana law requires officers to present or exhibit a search warrant at the place or to the person being searched. End of game.
And that wasn't even Michael. That was Pam.
Right.
Yep.
Pam's name was on it, not Michael's.
Correct.
So, and as Kevin just said, he has to have a copy of it or the original. It doesn't say anything about a digital copy. He can't just pull it up on his phone or a little portable laptop and show it to a person. He has to have the actual copy.
To be clear, the procedure for acquiring the warrant can be done with a combination of phone communication and digital communication. That part was done mostly properly to the best of our knowledge. The warrant must then be printed and initialed by the officer serving the warrant and presented to anyone on the property where the warrant is being served. No digital copy can replace that. Now let's get back to the parking lot at Smith's Marketplace.
And so she ultimately pulls into Smith's parking lot. We drove up to Pam's F-150, which was parked in the Smith's parking lot, and she was not inside the vehicle. I looked into the vehicle and observed that one of the bags of cat litter that she had purchased at Walmart was inside the vehicle. And based on that, we are going to seize the pickup pending a search warrant.
So I called for Ox and Son Towing to send a tow truck to impound her vehicle. What's the problem with this, Kevin?
There's no animals. We have no possession of animals.
There's no search warrant, Kevin.
There's no there's no search warrant. Right, and there's no search warrant. But there's no possession of an animal. She's not supposed to be in possession of animals. Not kitty litter. I use that on sidewalks. I mean,
I use that to
It
make
was cold. It was February.
I use it, right. Oil spill, right. My oil spills, right. I got an old 2000 out there. I put kitty litter on underneath my truck. So there's no true probable cause here at all to take her vehicle again without a search warrant. And Ox and Sons just gets this free pass of stealing people's vehicles. I know they don't want to be thrown. We don't want to throw them under the bus or put them in some kind of position, but you need to be able to see that warrant or else you're under theft. Yeah. You're taking somebody's property and you need to know that. These guys have never been challenged. Nobody has challenged these guys at all. Nobody has come to sheriff's department or people taking your truck or anything else like that.
Yep,
it's
right.
cat food and kitty litter. There's
We
no
were going
true
to
probable cause.
seize the pickup pending a search warrant, and so I called for Ox and Son Towing. So he called them before he even bothered to call for a warrant.
Right.
Yeah.
And right. And it's going to go on to even say that they came and he loaded it on without having the search warrant yet.
Because just note that this would have to be an entirely different search warrant because
Yes.
before this they had already applied for the original search warrant that's
warrant for
truly in
actual
question.
And they never did
Right.
get a search warrant for this, did they?
Nope.
well,
They
not,
never got a search
Nope.
warrant, at least not that they were released for the truck.
Right.
So
What's that?
they've never gotten a search warrant for the truck and they impounded it anyway.
While at Smith's, the captain had called Corporal Lindland and needed his assistance elsewhere, limiting resources to myself and Detective Smith. And based on me leaving my house at the time, I didn't have a portable radio that I generally would take with me. So I was limited with what I had.
He shows up with no tools. His tools are right down the road.
I mean, they're right there. Where's the urgency? Like, what is the urgency?
Of a misdemeanor.
of this whole thing. It's wild.
And the person who needs to answer that is Sheriff Slaughter.
Yeah.
What was the urgency behind this? Why were your officers feeling like they needed to prioritize this without backup, without going to get their tools, and just trying to get there as fast as they could? Slaughter needs to answer that. Again, I think the 719, I don't think that was actually mentioned by Cadner.
Right.
But this was one of those PowerPoint presentation, or part of the PowerPoint presentation. But this gives the CCSO's policies for body cameras. So procedures for body-worn camera use. Body-worn camera and in-car camera equipment shall be issued to all deputies, but it is used primarily for uniformed deputies as directed by the Cascade County Sheriff's Office. Deputies who are assigned body-worn and in-car camera equipment must use the equipment in standard daily patrol functions unless otherwise authorized by a supervisory personnel. So try not having a body camera or a camera in his car was, again, that ladders up to Sheriff Slaughter on why wasn't that done in the first place. Why is that not part of policies to do that? When, I mean, I would take exercising a search warrant or even surveillance to some degree as being part of standard daily patrol functions. And we know, based off of Cadner's testimony, which is just below that, is he issued a body-worn camera? He is. So Try had a body-worn camera. He just chose not to have it with him, not to go get it, and nothing of that. And that, again, that ladders up to Sheriff Slaughter himself, and he needs to be held accountable for that.
So I called Detective Smith and asked him to come back to Smith's, follow Pam's vehicle and Ox's sons to the impound lot and photograph it, and then I would proceed to her property instead.
Rather than having Smith come with him to the property, he has him go photograph an illegally impounded vehicle. That is something that is not of the utmost importance, not time sensitive, isn't any risk of any type of violence or confrontation. He sends him with the vehicle and doesn't say, come with me to the property.
Because supposedly all the other deputies in the entire county were busy. So isn't it more important that Detective Smith go with Try to the property once that warrant was issued? Or once not issued, but once they had a copy of it, which would have been a matter of what, 20 minutes?
20 minutes, maybe.
And Jake, I'm not sure if you're able to pull up a map of where Smith's is, where the Cascade County Sheriff's Office is, and where Wexford Lane is.
Oh, very close.
It was on the way.
Okay, so Smith's is right here. Sheriff's office is, 5 minutes away. On the way to Wexford Lane.
Mm-hmm.
There is one other route to get there, which is
McIver's. Yeah.
But you're 5 minutes from your office where you can get an actual physical copy of the warrant. You can meet up with the backup that you told to go to the impound lot, and then you can go to Wexford Lane.
And you can get your freaking gear.
You can get your gear.
You need your gear.
If you're going to do something, do it right the first time.
He has no
Take
tools.
your time.
If I showed up to work with no tools and no pencil, I'm fired.
Yep.
Shortly before he arrived, I called Pam on her cell phone. And during that phone conversation, she initially ignores the first phone call. I then call her a second time, when she answers, identify myself, and she asks, "What do you want?" Inform her that we're taking her vehicle pending a search warrant. She inquires why. I tell her that she was in possession of animals, which she denied. I then remind her that she purchased 41 pounds of cat food and I believe 14 pounds of cat litter at Walmart that day, which she told me that she purchased for Mike. She told me that she delivered the items to Mike on the property. And she told me that Mike had animals on the property, but he had all the paperwork for them, and that Mike has said she was on the property.
She's not lying. She's telling the truth to this detective.
She's telling the truth.
Yep, Mike is out there. Yes, and he had asked me. He doesn't have a vehicle, and he says this during the recording. I don't have a way out of here to leave.
She told me she delivered the items to Mike on the property. True. She told me that Mike had animals on the property. True, but he had all the paperwork for them. True. and that Mike essentially was using the property. True. So everything that she has stated is true, but he proceeds to go anyway.
She identifies this situation as bullshit. I tell her I'm going to 77 Wexford next after I complete her vehicle.
He tells her that he's going to her property, but then also states that he only went there to do surveillance.
Right.
Those two things are in complete contradiction.
Right.
You can't run surveillance when you tell the people, hey, I'm coming to run surveillance on you.
Right.
Those two things don't work together.
No.
It's down.
It holds us speechless, doesn't it? I mean, what else can you say to that? I mean, it's totally he puts himself in so much harm and everybody else over a misdemeanor.
Did you arrive at the property at 77 Wexford Lane?
I did.
And who was with you at that time?
It should be noted, as I'm driving down this property, I'm wearing cargo pants, which are patrol deputies wear, and then I'm wearing a black, a maroon collared shirt and a black Under Armour polo.
He then describes everything that he's wearing and never answers the question of who was with you at that time. Keep in mind that they're doing this in front of a jury. Okay, so
right.
There's a jury of people who are going to determine the outcome of this case. And if he admits right there that he went without backup, like full stop, that's what if he was being truthful, he would have said that right then.
Yep.
Yeah.
It makes him look really bad, and it puts a lot more suspicion on him. Instead, he completely diverts and talks about what he was wearing.
Yeah.
When that wasn't at all the question.
I don't get.
Either he's being malicious and just dodging the question, or he's stupid and is not actively listening during the lawyer and questioning him in something that he's sworn an oath to. So either he's stupid or malicious, one or the other.
No, he
So
broke.
why
he
didn't
broke protocol.
why didn't Racky come back and say, well, you didn't answer the question. Would you please answer my question?
That's exactly right.
Had there been an opposing counsel there,
Well,
they would have.
there would have been.
Yep. That's the issue. Like Racky is just as much to blame here as Try is, because Racky should have followed up with the same question.
Right.
Who was with you at that time? But Racky doesn't want there to be more of an investigation.
Right.
He's on Try's side. This is something that I have discovered throughout years and years of looking into government incidents. Is the government is always investigating itself. There's no private board, private organization that has any authority over the government or any investigative powers into the government at any given time. And so the government investigating itself ends up with the government siding with itself, which
Right.
that no one's actually going to be held accountable.
Well, and that's one of the big reasons we want to be calling this grand jury in the first place. One of the biggest factors is that this inquest was inadequate in actually examining the facts and trying to present them to a jury.
You've already been identified as law enforcement, and also to verify my identification. And Mike, it's no secret that I'm a cop.
This is not a sufficient reason to fail to identify himself as a police officer. Try was not at the property earlier that day. He must identify himself as law enforcement, which he never does.
And as I'm driving down Wexford Lane, my initial intent was just to stop and run surveillance until Detective Smith arrived. But ultimately, as I'm coming to a stop, as you can see on this photograph where my vehicle stops.
Not where I stop my vehicle, where my vehicle stops. Look, that is just...
Who talks like that?
That is such twisted wording. Where my vehicle stops. No. You're in charge of your vehicle. Like, you decide where it stops. You could have stopped a quarter of a mile back at the very top of the ridgeline and just watched, because you can still see things. You don't need binoculars to actually just see if somebody's moving about the property. Like,
right.
If not, it's a better vantage point, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So
you have the high ground.
Your vehicle doesn't just happen to stop right outside the gate. You stopped it there.
But before I'm stopping, I see Mike Hanson walking from the back of the property towards me. Ultimately, it was apparent that Mike wanted to speak to me. so I get out of my patrol vehicle and make contact with him.
You initiated the contact, buddy. All right. You initiated it when you called Pam knowing that she's going to call him. And you said, I'm going to go out after I process. Tri says, I'm going to go after I process the vehicle, or how that went. So maybe Pam was like, well, they're probably not going to come out until tomorrow. Okay. But they're probably going to be there. Okay, Mike. So
Right.
just so you know. Okay. But he sets himself up to fail by calling the suspect and telling him.
I would correct your language. It wasn't just that he initiated it. He instigated
He
something
instigated
by calling
it.
her.
Yeah.
It's instigating right off the bat. Yes. Thank you, Tony, for correcting me.
So please tell the jury what happened next.
I ask Mike how it's going, and he answers the same way Pam does. What do you want? I inform Mike that we have a search warrant for the property. He demands to see it. I tell Mike that my partner has a paper copy because Detective Smith had printed that, but he was going to Ox and Sons to photograph Pam's vehicle before meeting me on the property.
He should have studied up.
He should have studied up and known what he said, because he lies in this when he was saying what he actually said to Mike.
Mm-hmm.
He just
Okay,
full on lied.
specifically, which one here are you talking about?
So he said, I tell Mike that my partner has the paper copy because Detective Smith had printed that. Didn't say that, but he was going to Ox and Son to photograph Pam's vehicle before meeting me on the property. Didn't say that either.
No.
Didn't say that to Mike.
But he did say that in the audio, didn't he? Not in so many words.
He
but-
said, my partner, you'll see it when my partner gets here.
Yeah.
Just
So
so he doesn't describe anything in the.
he doesn't describe any of this stuff, though. Like, he didn't
No.
say his partner was the one who had printed it, or Ox and Son, or Pam's vehicle, or anything
Oh,
like that.
I got you. Okay.
Yeah. And basically, it's just an admission that he doesn't have the search warrant.
And I again inform him I have a search warrant for the property.
He doesn't actually have a search warrant for the property.
And I ask Mike what her conditions say. He asked me to clarify, and I say, what do her bond conditions say? He doesn't know, and I inform him that her bond conditions say that she's not supposed to possess or be in possession of animals.
That's not what he said in the tape. He should have known that. Like, he's the one who said it. He has the recording. It's on his phone. It's evidence. He should have reread it, but he is trying to paint himself in the best possible light.
Right. The jury needed to know that Tri said he lied when he said that she wasn't supposed to be around animals, because that's the main thing that's going on here, is that Mike had animals and she was around those animals. They weren't in her possession at all.
No.
Okay, so get back on page 24, line 21. He says, I inform him that her bond conditions say that she's not supposed to, but he never did say this stuff, right? Is that what you're saying?
He said he this is not the full truth. So he did say she's not supposed to be in possession of animals, but he started it with saying she's not supposed to be around any animals either, which is not true.
Mike now knows I have a search warrant for the property for my safety, his safety, the neighbor's safety, as well as the preservation of evidence. He needed to leave the property.
What the hell are you talking about?
You think if he was concerned about safety, he would have brought backup?
Yeah, you'd think if safety was a concern, he would have done things a little bit differently. First of all, how is it more safe for Tri? How is it more safe for Mike? How is it more safe for his neighbors? I understand as well as the preservation of evidence. That is the only one that could potentially make sense. But the first three things make absolutely no sense.
No. And Mike was committing no criminal. He could do surveillance, like we were talking about. And then if he observed Mike doing something, that would give him the probable cause to do what he would need to be doing. He was not. He was standing in front of him, answering questions, demanding the warrant. Mike was not observed doing anything criminal. Everywhere you go, any law enforcement that you go to and you watch or whatever else, they always say the same thing. It's a rule that we say, for my safety and for your safety and for everybody's safety, I'm going to put you in handcuffs. He never even says that to him. He doesn't even say that he's under arrest. He never says anything to detain him or do anything to give him that order that he's going to be even detained. So I don't know what safety. Jake, you hit it right on the head. What are you talking about? What safety?
Why did he bring the neighbors into this? What do the neighbors have to do with anything?
Exactly. Right.
But he also says, because Mike now knows
Right.
I have a search warrant for the property.
No, he doesn't.
He doesn't know that, and he doesn't have a search warrant.
He knows why I'm there. He lives on 10 acres that I have no access to in its entirety if he were to go back. I have access, but I don't know it well enough to know where he would go, and it's just not safe for either of us.
Okay. Well, Mike lives there, so if you're saying it's not safe for him to live on his own property, you're a fool.
He does say on line 3, page 26, Try knows. He says he lives on 10 acres that I have no access to. So he's admitting that Mike lives there.
Yeah.
So
that's an interesting point, because Mike never said that.
No.
That he lives there.
No, he didn't.
That is an interesting point.
I've already told him I have a search warrant. Legal means to be there. Legal authority to give him that order. It needs to leave.
All untrue.
I see nothing.
He did tell him that he had a search warrant, but he never presented it,
right.
Which would have granted him the legal means to be there, the legal authority to give him that order, and that Mike. Well, even Mike needing to leave is up for interpretation as well.
Yeah, there's no statute.
Warrant.
I think one thing that we need to be clear on as we're examining this is there's some various law in terms of being detained, and regardless if it's lawful or not, your rights to be able to resist that arrest. At this point, we're not talking about Mike Hanson and what he should have done or what he shouldn't have done. We're just talking about Jacob Try and if what he was doing was unlawful. And from our estimate, there's a bunch that he did that was unlawful. Doesn't matter what Mike did at the end of the day. What Try did was unlawful. And he should be held accountable for it.
Legal must be there for my safety and his. He repeats that again, which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then he goes, so mind you, he just said for my safety, he's extremely concerned with safety. And then 2 paragraphs later, he says every patrol deputy on
patrol was busy on a call for service. My one detective was on Mountstrom helping with their investigation. My other detective was following the vehicle, and the only available person at that time for myself when I left Smith's was myself.
So he is not concerned with anyone's safety.
No, he's so arrogant and so focused on this that he could handle any situation that would be able to come to him. To hell with everybody else, to hell with protocol, to hell with everything. I got this. I got my Superman cape on, and this misdemeanor is going to get taken care of.
Again, tell Mike, at this point, I tell Mike, I'll show you the warrant because I have it on my cell phone.
He doesn't say that.
And I'm audio recording on my phone.
He doesn't say that.
And during this conversation with Mike, I pull up the search warrant in my email, but I'm scared that I'm going to lose the audio recording.
Mind you, he's worried that pulling up the search warrant will end the audio recording.
Right.
This is what he testified. But then he says he pulls it up in his email.
Right.
But he's scared he's going to lose the audio recording. Those two things don't make sense. The audio is still recording and you pulled up the email. So couldn't you just flip the phone around and show him the digital copy of the warrant, which we still contest isn't allowed.
I think the reason he didn't do that is because he knows it's not correct. It's not legal to do that. That's why I think he didn't do that.
Yeah. You can't show up. You can't be a human placeholder for a warrant until the warrant arrives.
Right.
Like, that's not how this works. You have to show up with the warrant in order for the warrant to have any effect on anything.
And I again tell him, step off the property, essentially come here, and I'll show you the warrant.
Right.
That is not at all what he says in that audio recording.
And ultimately, I make the decision. Mike has made the decision that he's not going to step off the property. And for my safety, once again, my nearest backup was the guy that was responding, Detective Smith, who was leaving Smith's to go to Ox & Sons do photography, and it was probably going to be 40 minutes to an hour because there was no expedited response. I was supposed to only be running surveillance, but ultimately interact. Mike made this contact happen sooner than it was supposed to.
And so I leap over this gate to take Mike into custody. Mind you, he doesn't say that to Mike before he leaps over
No.
the gate. This is the most egregious part, I think, of the entire action of jumping over the fence. He says,
And
I'm in midair.
Mike reaches into his pocket, and he's kind of in towards the left side, but upper part of that camper. But he reaches into his right pocket. I don't know if it was a coat or a vest. I can't tell you, but he reaches into his pocket and he says, all right.
He's observing this all in midair.
And at this point, shit's gone south. I know that I have no way out. I'm in midair. There's a gate to my left. There's a camper that I have no idea who the threat is, and now Mike is also a threat to me. In my 10 years of law enforcement, any use of force training I've attended, everyone is taught, and in my interactions as an investigator, hands kill people.
Did
So
anywhere in those 10 years of law enforcement training, did they advise you don't jump over a fence of private property when you don't have a warrant on you? That's my biggest question there. But he observed all this and thought all this while in midair.
Right.
Yeah, that's a lot to think about, especially when he doesn't. I mean, good that he didn't identify if it was a coat or vest, and he knows his limitations on what he could identify. But
Right.
and then that's a lot to be thinking in half a second to a second midair.
Yeah. And he goes into
Well,
detail.
I
even
believe
further.
that when he says that as he leaped over the gate, Mike reaches into his pocket, he reaches into his right pocket. I believe that is a flat out lie by Tri. Why, if you were Mike and you're turning around to walk away and you knew that Tri didn't have a weapon pulled on you or a taser or anything, all he had was his cell phone, why would you start digging in your pocket for a gun? Somebody answer me that. Kevin wouldn't. Tony wouldn't. Jake wouldn't. I know I wouldn't.
Well, it's cold out. We could say he just had his hands in his pocket. He pulls his left one out, and then he admits later on.
Yeah, it's February in North Montana.
Right.
Here's the part where he comes to the ground.
And as I come to the ground, I draw my firearm from my holster. And as I'm drawing, Mike still has his hand in his pocket like this, and he's moving it.
Okay.
And I'm watching him, and I say something along the lines of, what do you got there? And then I say something along the lines of, show me your hand or something like that. But as I'm saying that, Mike ultimately pulls a snub-nosed revolver out of his pocket, and as it reaches, it clears the pocket, because it's, you'll see it here, but as it clears the pocket, I know at that point that if I don't stop Mike from shooting me, that he's gonna, or if I don't stop Mike from shooting me, then he's gonna shoot me.
Then
How
they
do
talk
you
about the firearm.
see all of that?
Great.
You cannot see all of that.
No. And we've discussed this multiple times. Like, if Mike had his firearm out first, Tri would be dead.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Look, Alan, his brother, Mike's brother, will 100% tell you that they are extremely good shots. His sons will tell you that Mike was an extremely good shot. If Mike had his gun out first, even if he had one empty chamber as the safety, even if he had that, Tri would not be here. Now.
Well, and I think, especially considering the sequence of shots, Hanson being shot first in the neck and then potentially another shot in his chest. Either way, he has one shot in the neck, may or may not have another shot in his chest. By the time he gets a shot off that actually hits Tri, I mean, that's freaking good aim.
Yeah, it's the third shot in the sequence.
And he says he's shooting like Western style. He says he's shooting Western style. All right, from the hip.
Yeah.
Okay. At 8 yards.
Yeah.
So at that point, knowing that Mike is going to shoot me or kill me if I don't match his level of force. I discharge 1 round from my firearm. And Mike responds with, "All right, fucking asshole." At that point, I have a malfunction with my firearm. And Mike takes that firearm that he had and turns it 90 degrees. And I'm looking down the barrel of his firearm as I'm trying to fix a malfunction in my firearm. And while staring at the barrel of a firearm, Mike's thumb, I could just watch it do circular motions. And while fixing that malfunction, Mike begins shooting at me and ultimately strikes me in my left shoulder with 1 round.
Incorrect.
Yeah.
That
You
is
don't even need the full audio analysis that we've done
No.
to know that's wrong.
Yeah, that is 100% wrong. Mike does not fire his first round till after the malfunction's already cleared and Try has already shot his second shot.
Yeah.
So that is just a straight up lie. There's no way around that. That's not him. There's no other option.
To me, that puts the rest of his testimony, all of his testimony, into question. The only thing that I will take out of his testimony that is true is that he shot first.
You know, you can go and find all of these things on shootings, and when you do, all right, when I was in class, okay, so I took my advanced shooting classes, the first thing that they say is when or if you are involved in a shooting, put a name on every one of your bullets before you load them in, because that's going to be the ones that are going to be affected by every bullet downrange that you put down. Second of all, never tell them anything about the shoot, because you don't know. Your mind wants to put in things that you didn't really happen. And for Racky or whoever else to advise him to go ahead and start telling this whole story about how he saw this firearm coming out, or how he saw this, it just plays to what they think about the jury, about how ignorant they think the jury is and how dumb they think that they are.
Yeah.
Because when you are trying to tell what happened during an elevated situation of that nature, okay, every lawyer out there that's going to represent you say, shut your mouth, because you don't know what you actually did. You would go, if I put you under stress and I took you out to the range and I put you actually under stress, and I start getting you aggravated and I get you mad and whatever else, and I say, okay, shoot, okay, we're gonna go. Even those who hear the timer go off when I'm training them, and I say, well, how many shots did you do? 4? No, you did 2. Okay, all right, you did 2. And they're like, what? Really? Wow. Okay. Because the mind wants to put in things that it was.
Someone please tell me what on earth those circular motions are supposed to be.
The amount of detail that he can describe.
No shit.
And then provide a lie like that afterwards. Again, any detail that he does provide is in total question.
Yeah. You know what he was watching? Home Alone. I think it was 2, when he's got the glump on top of the revolver and he's going, shoot him, and all of those pigeons are going all over the place, and he's rolling his thumb trying to get the revolver to go, because he got you can't see that. And listen, I have been shooting practical shooting and rifle competitions and training with law enforcement for a long time. If I have a malfunction, I look down to clear my malfunction at my face, clear my malfunction, re-engage, and then bring up. There is no way you're looking and the way that he was standing. There's no way.
Especially considering all of that happens in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
2 seconds.
He is looking down at his gun to clear your malfunction. You don't clear a malfunction not looking at the weapon.
Right.
Like, you have no idea what's going on with it.
And I ultimately fixed my firearm, return fire until Mike falls to the ground. And then I jump over the fence again, run to my unmarked patrol vehicle, and advise dispatch of shots fired, that I had been hit in the left arm, and that the subject was down.
We will now move on to the next witnesses in the inquest. This section will be much shorter, but the testimony given is no less problematic. Where do you want to start, Kevin? I know you probably have the most. Let's see. It's page 50, I think, is when he starts.
In the official transcript?
In the official transcript, yeah.
Yeah, because Recky asked some.
Does the suspect or occupant of the property have a legal right to resist leaving the property?
No.
There's no statute that says you have to leave the property.
Yeah, and I think that's the most important, because that's not only a federally protected constitutional right, that's also a state of Montana protected constitutional right, that we should be safe in our property from unlawful search and seizure. So they need to be presenting these warrants in order to do so.
So during this whole thing, the constitutional sheriff allowed 2 constitutional rights to get broken.
Yeah.
That's great. That's what you want out of your constitutional sheriff.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, even if Detective Sergeant Try didn't have a search warrant, if Detective Sergeant Try had arrived and said, I need you to step off the property, we're obtaining one, he would have to step off the property lawfully. Having a search warrant is more like it bolsters your case, so to speak, but it's not required.
That's crazy,
astounding, man. Like, that is the most wild thing for a sheriff. So
a constitutional sheriff. Let's be very clear how. Okay,
that's what I was going to get at. Kevin, you've probably known Jesse for the longest amount of time. Can you just describe like what he ran on and what he promised to Cascade County citizens?
Well, yeah, that he was a constitutional sheriff. He was joining the constitutional sheriffs of the United States of America. I mean, all those guys that got together and everything. He was claiming he was part of these guys too, and he was going to be this constitutional sheriff, and that's what he ran on. He ran on, this big constitutional guy, Second Amendment guy. And there was one instance where I was like, okay, our laws are very clear in Montana for trespassing. We here in Montana have a stand your ground laws, and we take private property very, very seriously. And if they are going to breach that, well, we want to make sure, and this is for every citizen, that we stay within our limits of our rights. And those rights are, well, we get to defend ourselves. If we're met with force, we're going to retaliate with force. And so that was his biggest thing that he was running on, is that, he would be there and he would make sure that, the Constitution is followed, the Montana state Constitution and its laws. And so that's kind of where Jesse was.
Yeah. Is it common practice to have people step off the property for work?
Absolutely.
I mean, what is that supposed to mean? Common practice. Does that simply mean if a sheriff's deputy shows up and says, well, we're getting a search warrant, you need to get off the property? Yeah, most people probably would, because frankly, a lot of people fear law enforcement.
Right.
So what is that common practice supposed to mean when Racky's asking that? I don't know. I'm sure you don't either.
Well, yeah, because it's not set in statute. There is no statute in the U.S. code or in Montana code that you are obligated to leave the property.
And I think, it's the same thing as if a law enforcement officer has a search warrant to search your vehicle, they're going to ask you to get out of the vehicle before they search it.
And again, this is where he does an absolute disservice to everybody that is on that jury and everybody that is here. It is set in stone. The Supreme Court is very clear on the difference between a vehicle stop and a home search warrants and the privacy thereof. That is very separated. And this is where me and Tony had found Article 2, Section 10, where it states that we are allowed to have that privacy is put into us and to the people. And they hold it at the highest regard for that understanding. Now, he goes in here and he says, well, if I have the search warrant, you have to exit the vehicle because you don't want to be climbing over the people that are in there. Right. Well, okay, sure. Exactly. But if you have that search warrant in hand and you're like, well, we're going to search the car now, but they have more leniency and because they're traveling, there's a lot more lenience because you're in a vehicle, you're on state highways or things of that nature, and they could look physically into your car. Okay. And the this is where we were saying the privacy part of this is that they don't get to just on your property remove you from the property because you think that you're in the way of them not being able to go around you to get into your home or to the adjacent area of your home. Okay, so you are protected under that area. Okay, your car you are not, and you're doing them a disservice by saying that because you're just acting like all of that is parallel and you're supposed to comply when they're on your property. You don't even, most of it says you're not supposed to even leave your property when they can detain you, and they can say, well, we're going to detain you, we don't want you to do this, but that's when they have the search warrant in their hand. But you still get to see what they're doing inside your home. You could still be, they're going to put you in an area, but that's why you go with two officers. That's why you go and you follow that major protocol that you never go alone to do a search warrant. And if you get pulled over by any law enforcement, and if they're going to do that type of a stop, they're going to have at least 3 or 4 officers there, at least. So your vehicle is very different when you're traveling than you are with your property of your home.
Well, and I think just to provide the analogy for your home, like to get out of your vehicle is the same as if you're standing in the threshold of a door to just get out of the threshold of the door so then they can have access to the property. It's very different than asking them to actually get off the property altogether.
Right. And you have the right to shut your door if they don't have a warrant. You just shut your door and you're done.
Is there any legal requirement that you show someone a paper copy of the search warrant before they get off the property?
No.
There's nothing in Montana Code Annotated that says they can serve a search warrant without the actual warrant. And we've also been waiting for responses from both Slaughter and from Racky to anything that points differently than that. So we're very adamant that Tri had to have a copy or the original or a photocopy of that warrant before he even bothered to show up out there.
Yeah.
So it's just cut and dry. There's just no other way around it. It doesn't matter what they think or what their procedure is. Statutes always trump procedures or rules. It's that simple.
And what, if any, ability to resist Detective Tri would Mike have had legally?
He has none. If you read Montana Code Annotated under resisting arrest, subsection 2, actually it literally says, and the Montana legislature has determined that even if, and in this case it wasn't, but even if the arrest or detention is unlawful, you can't resist.
Mike was not under arrest.
Right. Yeah.
So he's not resisting arrest at all.
He's not resisting arrest. And we hear that in the video, and whichever he comes back and he comes back and he comes back. One point he says to him, well, I'll arrest you for, obstruction if you don't. Well, he doesn't know what he's obstructing, first off, because he hasn't seen the warrant to what he's obstructing in the first place. Yeah. So he can't even say what he's obstructing. I'm obstructing your authority to what are we obstructing here? And then Jesse has to come back and he says, well, that is not the case actually in this. He wasn't resisting arrest. He wasn't resisting being detained either. And
did you have to do anything or get anything before you went onto the property?
Yes, I had to get a search warrant before I could actually process.
And we've talked about there was a search warrant for the property. Why did you have to get one?
Well, I have to have a search warrant in order to go on a private property. A lot of people don't know this, but when most homicides, we have to get a search warrant for the property in which we were searching crime scenes of homicides. Again, there's perishable evidence, that being the body. That's always a consideration. But In this case, of course, everything was left as is until I got a search warrant for this property. And I can't piggyback on the search warrant that the sheriff's office had. Their search warrant was pertaining to their case. It was not applicable to my purposes for being there. So I have to get my own independent search warrant to do my processing for this investigation.
Yes, I mean, here's another admission. Thank you. I mean,
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Yet another person confirming that they broke the law.
right in their own testimony. And to these jurors, we're sorry, man. You guys got bamboozled. They actually asked you the question and they lied to you. Bart pointed this out before, where they were questioning. One of the jurors had asked him about the search warrant, and he just skates around it and ends up going down a different path. And that's awful. That's blatantly misleading the jury when they don't bring up 227.
And when I look at the shooting review board, that's not highlighted.
Really?
223 is highlighted. The first line of 225 is highlighted, and 228 in terms of using reasonable force is highlighted. But they did not highlight 227, which says service of a search warrant is made by exhibiting. But you can see line 5 there. That's 227. They do not have that highlighted. They did not talk about it in the inquest.
Yeah, it became very clear to me that there was a real contentious relationship in her view of the sheriff's office and the history going back to her animal issues or instances and charges that she has. She hyper militant against the sheriff's office, saying that they operate without search warrants. She was telling me, she says they were out there that day without a search warrant. That's the way they do things.
And to be fair, like that final line, she was telling me, she says they were out there that day without a search warrant. That's the way they do things. And they were. Smith was out there on that day without a search warrant and observing the property.
And so was Try.
And so was Try.
There are only a couple more statements that we're going to present in this episode, and we thank you for staying with us for this long. Please make sure you like, subscribe, and share the video. If you'd like to support us even more, go to PeacefulSea.network and join the Dollar Media Club. That will aid us in producing more episodes and more seasons of this show. Thank you again for tuning in. Let's get back to the final analysis.
Who's in charge of animal control?
Sheriff's Department.
The Sheriff's Department.
Well, in this instance, yeah, in Sheriff's Department here in Cascade County. Yep.
Why didn't he take the dog after they completed it? I have text messages from them backing this up from the other day that they left the dog out there for 4 days with no food, but it was in a run kennel, but it was cold. It's in February, and they left this dog out there.
Yeah, and I just want to make it very clear that the dog we're referring to was Mike's dog that he owned that was on the property. Sheriff's Department showed up after the shooting, cleaned up the scene, supposedly collected some evidence, left, came back the next day, collected more evidence, and still didn't bring back the dog or take care of the dog. The dog was locked in that kennel for 4 days with no food and frozen water. Yeah, and mind you, the whole case was about animal cruelty. Like the whole search warrant in the case from 4 years ago was all about animals.
Right.
And they show up and they don't take the one domesticated animal on the property.
Right.
That's insane.
I think one thing just to clarify, so in Montana, and this is my understanding from what I've been told from some various experts, is that a lot of the other counties, if not all of them in Montana, have an animal control officer actually assigned or hired. But here in Cascade County, we don't have one of those. And so that responsibility falls upon the sheriff's office to be the animal control officer. And so when you consider the dog that was out there, as well as the multiple cats that were also identified out there, which is much later in the transcripts here, especially since all of this really centers on an animal abuse case in the first place, the sheriff's office is just as negligent in caring for those animals as the person that they keep trying to prosecute, which is Pam.
100%.
Yeah. So ultimately, they don't based off their actions, they do not care about animal neglect or cruelty. What it seems that they care about is when this makes the news and they either look good or they look bad. And I think that was their priority with this.
Yeah, and it got a guy killed.
Without even presenting the entirety of the inquest document, we were able to show you 22 times that the witnesses lied under oath, as well as nearly a dozen laws that were broken, many of them more than once. If we had the time to present the entire document, you would see far more lies and far more laws broken. Considering that this inquest was used to determine whether or not Mike Hanson was killed in a criminal fashion, we contend that the inquest was a fraud, and that the jury was never given the opportunity to make an informed decision. This must be rectified, and we'll go into how that can be done in the next episode.
Josh Rackey's closing statements, because I think that's where it's just he paints this picture based off of several lies, and that is the last thing that the jury hears before they make their decision.
Yeah.
I know page 116 and 117. I was just reading that and jotting down notes. What a joke.
Yeah.
What a joke.
Let's see.
That's terrible.
If the police come to your door and don't have a warrant, does that give you the right to shoot them? Oh, for God's sake.
I know.
The question
because
of this
that's
inquest,
what Mike did.
right. Well, and even regardless, the point of this inquest is not to be looking at were Mike Hanson's actions correct or not. It's to look at the criminality and the lawfulness of Jacob Try's actions.
Yep.
Regardless of what Mike did, Jacob Try was committing unlawful acts and used his authority unlawfully.
There we go. I'm just going to read it real quick. Shouldn't take very long.
Yeah.
Mr. Rackey.
I'll just give a brief closing before I hand you the verdict form. There are three things you have to decide, or four things, you have to decide. One, who the first person was. I think that's pretty obvious. Everyone says it was Mike Hanson. When did he die? Would have been February, the early evening, late afternoon of February the 23rd. He died at 77 Wexford Lane. And probably the most important one here is, was the death caused by criminal means? And really what you're deciding there, you saw the last slide about self-defense. We call it use of force in defense of another, but self-defense. Really is what you're deciding there is, was Detective Try's actions justifiable given the circumstances? And you heard him testify. Was it justifiable when a gun was pointed at him for him to fire back? And I think in this case, you're the jury, you're the final determiner of the facts, but I think you'll just determine that obviously if someone points a gun at you, it's okay to, you have to do that. The person in control of this whole situation was Mike Hanson. Mike Hanson got himself shot. Mike Hanson could have stepped off the property, could even have that gun, and been fine. He pulled the gun on Detective Try. And even if you were to determine that he had maybe some legal basis to do so, or maybe Detective Try should have showed him the warrant, the question you have to ask yourself is, if the cops come into your house and you ask to see the warrant, they don't show it to you right away, do you get to shoot them? Because that's what Mike did. He said he was just going to shoot him. And Detective Try had to defend himself. And so if you think when you think about it that way, it's pretty obvious that Mr. Hanson controlled the situation and he pulled a gun on a cop. You don't pull it down on a policeman, especially when they're there lawfully. And so following that, Detective Try had to use force as he felt necessary. In this case, it was deadly force. And as a result, Mike Hanson got himself killed that day.
My God.
Mhm.
Being there in that during that inquest, and I heard that final line of, as a result, Mike Hanson got himself killed that day. That it was sickening. I would have. Again, if Kevin was there, he probably would have got up and like, this is bullshit. But yeah, it was a ridiculous closing statement. Hearing it in person from him, it was worse. I can't believe he can sleep at night.
I
can't
can't believe they consider this an investigation into the incident and into Jacob Try's actions.
Yeah, me too.
Nothing that Racky said would imply that he was investigating Try.
Right.
No.
The suspect in this instance was Mike Hanson, and they refer to him as a suspect several times.
Yep, not the victim, which he was.
Manipulating the jury. That's what they do.
That's a concern for me as a citizen, and should be concerned as any citizen, that our law enforcement should be trained first and foremost on how to respect our individual rights before they start trying to execute their other responsibilities.
Cascade Effect is brought to you by PeacefulSea Network. Theme song by Jay Denton and Hannah Parrott. Special thanks to Kevin Leatherbarrow, Tony Rosales, Tim Hanson, Arliss Hanson, Bart Crabtree, the Cascade County Libertarian Party, and the Montana Citizens Council on Judicial Accountability. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved.